everyone, and welcome. I am Kim Gibson, the Executive Director of Disability Link in Atlanta, Georgia, and your Vice Chair of the April Board. And I am your facilitator of the call today. We have John, who is the ASL interpreter. I just have Brittany as our host and Alicia as our captioner. Thank you for joining us for this workshop. Very important topic, reaching out and serving the youngest youth. We have, I knew I'm going to mess this up, Aja Jones, Paige Maxwell, and Miranda, cannot pronounce that last name, as our talkers today, our presenters. I want to mention a few housekeeping items before we get started today. First, when you scroll over the screen, a menu bar pops up. Depending on what device you are on, you can find that menu bar at the top or at the bottom of the screen. There is where you will find the closed captioning for today's session. You can view the captioning by selecting the CC tab on the menu bar. Stream text is also available for today's call. You can find that in the conference website connection instructions for this session. For sign language interpreting, you can find the interpreter on the screen. To join into chat, please find the word bubble in that same menu bar. Once that is selected, that will allow you to follow along with the chat or add in your comments. Now this is really, really important. For Q&A times, please note the Q&A boxes on the menu bar. Make sure that is where you submit your questions. Please submit those questions there, as they may get lost in chat. To ask a question or make a comment, you can also select the hand option on the menu, and that allows us to know you have a question. For those of you on the phone today or using keystrokes, we ask that you press *9 on your keypad to raise your hand. We will then let you know when to unmute you. Remember, if you join into the conversation, please keep all background noise down as much as possible to allow us to hear you clearly. Thank you and enjoy your presentation.
Hi. Can y'all hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, okay, I just want to make sure. I am Paige Maxwell. I am from Able, South Carolina, if you couldn't hear the y'all in my twang. And I am with Aja today, and we're going to chat through reaching and serving our youngest youth, and we'll talk about who exactly that is and who we're talking about when we say our youngest youth, and a little bit about our programs and other things. So like I said, I'm Paige Maxwell. I'm the director of our youth transition programs for Able, South Carolina, and I'm going to let Aja introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aja Jones, and I'm an equip leader at Able, South Carolina.
All right, awesome. So like I said, we're going to chat a little bit through our youth programs and who we're already serving, and highlight in particular some lessons that we've learned from serving elementary school students, and as well as some success stories from that, and kind of where we came up with this concept of talking about our youngest youth and why it's so important. Aja is going to really dive into the importance and really kind of that IL and that SIL perspective of serving our younger youth. And we're going to try and intertwine all of this with some personal experiences, because we feel like that always makes things a little more interesting and a little more tangible. So goals for our session are to learn from our mistakes. I think it's really important to share out our experiences with one another. I'm sure you all have joined some of the Connect calls that April hosts. I know the Youth Coordinator Connect is extremely valuable for me, and getting to hear what other youth coordinators are up to and what's working and what's not. So we're going to start with some wish we had knowns to share with you all. Goals, we're hoping that you will join us in recognizing that our youngest youth and serving them through that independent living philosophy and through peer mentoring is just as important as those transition age youth and everyone in between. And then hopefully walking away with some ideas of how you can maybe start this, how you can improve programs if you're already serving these youth, just kind of starting a few starting points. All right, so I'm going to lay out the foundations of kind of what we're already up to and who we are serving and how it's going. So I've got an image on the screen of the state of South Carolina, and it's divided up into our counties, just so you can kind of get an idea of where we are and what we're coming from and who we're serving. So there are 46 counties in the state of South Carolina, and Able, South Carolina serves 23. There are 3 centers in total in our state. I know that's on the smaller side compared to some other states. So we've got 2 sister SILs, Accessibility and Walton Options. And together they serve 16 of those remaining counties. And so that leaves 9 kind of unserved counties, but thankfully through other programming and contracting that we do, we get to serve those counties as we can. So we have served in this past fiscal year 1,675 youth in that 0 to 29 age range. And I'm very proud of this number because I think it's so important, and I know we're serving more and more every day. And I think we can all agree that serving youth and catching them young and really building them up is really important. And we've served them through a number of ways, through our independent living skills, so that one-on-one, through a lot of our pre-ET services that I'll talk through in just a moment, some peer mentoring through the EQUIP program that Aja will touch on a little bit, and then through some other trainings and things of that nature. But I really want to share this number because even though it's so big and I'm so excited about it, I think a majority of those that we serve in this 0 to 29 are really that transition age. So this pre-ETs, that 13 to 21, and then kind of beyond that 22 to 29. So we're missing a huge chunk of that very big age range. And so when we looked at this, we were kind of like, we need to do more. So that was kind of where we got started. So I'm going to try and be brief because I know this is kind of the boring stuff, but the nuts and bolts are helpful. So like I said, we're serving youth through pre-employment transition services like a lot of other SILs are. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Our state vocational rehabilitation and Commission for the Blind are separate, which I know is different from state to state. So they work together to contract us and the other SILs in the state to do those classic pre-ETs curriculum and trainings that we know are so important. And then our Department of Education, the Office of Special Education Services, contracts us as well to do pre-ETs related things, but it's a little bit broader. So I listed the curriculum that we do under our pre-ETs with VR, but beyond that, we'll do some healthy relationships, disability pride, disability history. Teachers will request all sorts of random things that they'd like us to see. So that's how we're serving a large majority of that youth number that I shared. And then YLF, our Youth Leadership Forum, we do this with our other sister SILs in the state, and our DD Council funds this. And I know a lot of other states have YLFs. So I think that this is another great way that we're serving youth. And we're recognizing that it's that older age range, those youth that are transitioning out of high school and into college, and that's important. And then I'm going to let Aja chat through our EQUIP program and what that looks like.
Paige, this is Kim Gibson, and I have to question that you may be able to answer.
Okay.
Is the youth age defined state by state? In Ohio, the youth age ends at 24. Just curious. And that comes from Angie Burton.
Yeah, I think maybe state by state. I know for us, when we were thinking youth, our PTI gave us that number, that 0 through 29. And then that pre-ETS is that age range, that 13 to 21 through the WIOA. So I feel like it's a pretty broad term. I think in general, under 30 is safe. But hopefully that answers the question.
Hi, I'm going to talk a bit about EQIP. So EQIP is funded by the Developmental Disabilities Council. It has several different functions. EQIP has monthly hangouts, and these are both generally these are online and in person. Right now, due to the pandemic, it's only online, and they take place at the Greenville and Columbia offices at Able, South Carolina. And what happens here is there's generally different topics. The youth get to choose the topics, suggest the topics, and the EQIP leaders will create a hangout, or it's like an informal lesson and discussion about that specific topic. There's also a week-long summer series. It's a leadership summer series, and youth learn about things like disability rights, self-advocacy, leadership, and independent living skills. And it's over the course of a week, and they learn from facilitators and they learn from each other. It's very similar to YLF, except it is only during the day rather than YLF, which is day and night. Then there is the one-on-one peer mentoring. And this is where EQIP leaders interact with consumers, and they provide one-on-one support, and they share from their learned experiences. And this is generally an informal kind of support, working with youth on their goals, and it's again self-directed. You know, the goals that the youth themselves choose. Another thing about EQIP is that an important aspect of it is the young adult leaders on Able SC staff. So EQIP is in a large part run by youth that are in the same age range that we serve. The EQIP age range is from 13 to 28. And these leaders have different responsibilities. They, facilitate the monthly hangouts. They facilitate lessons at the summer series. Then they go into schools with youth independent living specialists. And they also provide that one-on-one peer mentoring.
I'm going to jump in really quick too and say that this program is really neat because it's essentially run by young adults with disabilities within Able. So it's almost like a smaller youth SIL within our SIL. So pretty exciting. I can put my camera back on. So when we were looking at our trends in the youth that we were serving, we noticed that we were missing kind of that younger middle school before that pre-ETS age of 13 and really below that, so elementary school. And so we applied for, with one of our smaller regional United Ways, a grant we had titled EQIP for Future Success. And the original intent was to bring in our EQIP leaders to lead some sessions in elementary schools. And they, at the time, the request for proposals that they put out, a lot of them were career and job focused. And so we thought that we could take this on. And so we did 6 kind of preset classroom visits about job and career awareness with upper elementary. We thought that was a little bit more appropriate. So 3rd through 5th grade. And our equipped leaders would go into the classrooms with some of our youth independent living specialists, so younger staff members with disabilities, and talk about all sorts of things related to job and career awareness. They talked about how hobbies translate into jobs, the concept of job versus career, which was really difficult for elementary age. So that was a lesson learned, that maybe job and career awareness is not the most exciting and tangible material for elementary school students to learn. But we did find success in bringing our young adult leaders and our young staff into the classroom, and especially if there was a visible disability, or really talking about disability openly. And so that peer modeling and peer mentoring was really, really important. We got lots of positive feedback from teachers and school administrators, and students were definitely engaged and asking lots of questions, and being really excited to identify themselves. And so that's always a cool aha moment to watch. And so we tried to incorporate a lot of our other staff members to come in and speak about their first ever job experiences, or what that process was like, and setting goals to have jobs and careers. So we overall found this pretty successful. What we did learn was that getting in elementary schools is incredibly difficult. They have a lot of things going on. There's a lot of really fun things that come to elementary schools. Like, I feel like firemen bring their big trucks, and there's just a lot of exciting things that young kids want to do. And so they get packed out in their schedule. So connecting with our elementary schools and our admin early was something that we learned. So if you're looking to head into elementary schools, I highly suggest that. Catching admin in the summer, I think, is really, really important and helpful. And the idea of disability awareness and career focused concepts were not on the top of teachers' radars. So they were definitely looking at programs that support, reading and math, and some of those core competencies that students are really focused on in elementary school. And so it was a little bit of a harder sell. So I think content-wise, making sure that it's something that your elementary school teachers and administrators are really, really interested in. And I'm going to talk a little bit about another program that we did, that we pivoted from learning on this job and career awareness as not being the most accessible and interesting for the youth and the teachers. And then a lot of what we learned too is that we had to have a lot of personal contact with elementary school teachers, and really like putting a lot into those relationships to get ourselves in the door and to get us open, and allow us to come in and trust us. Something else that we learned is that a lot of these classes, there are self-contained classes in South Carolina, but some of the students we saw were resource students that were in their pull-out resource time, but a lot of the classes we were invited into were the general education setting. So we got to serve an inclusive setting for students with and without disabilities, which made some of the programming more powerful and really open in talking about that. And so we really love that aspect. I feel like when you head into middle schools and high schools with pre-ETs, you're already kind of ruling that option out. And so this was something that we were really excited about. So this funding unfortunately ended, but it was a great pilot for a couple of years for us to really learn what worked and what didn't. And so from there, our Department of Education, the Office of Special Education Services, reached out to us in March when everyone went home, and they were looking for a lot of resources and support for their teachers and for their students and families. And a big topic that kept coming up was social emotional learning, and especially for our younger students. And so they kind of threw out, would you be up for this? Is this something you can provide? And we said, absolutely. And And so this kind of allowed us to continue to work with elementary school students in a different capacity, obviously, but we were very, very excited about this. And so we utilized a pretty well-known and researched curriculum, Sanford Harmony, and we kind of pulled from there their main topics and some of their activities, and looked at some of their models for learning, and twisted it into our own, but they were definitely our starting point. And so the topics they had for social emotional learning for elementary school students were diversity, inclusion, community, peer relationships, and problem solving, which I feel like are pre-ETS topics, and just general topics that everyone needs to be discussing and understanding. And so we ended up taking these topics, creating a website, and I have all the links in here, and I'll make sure that this updated PowerPoint is sent out to everyone through our April people. But what we did was it was just a Google site that we utilized, and we had a lesson for kindergarten and first grade. And it was one of our staff members, and some animation with a PowerPoint and some other things. And they talked through the first concept was diversity. So they talked through what diversity was, and it was interactive and youth could follow along. And then there was an activity video, and it was someone explaining what an activity was to kind of test and learn those concepts and put those concepts into practice. And then there was a sheet of all these extra activities that they could do at home with family and friends and neighbors. And so we did this for each kind of grade chunks. So kindergarten first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And that worked really great. And we got a lot of positive feedback from that. And we're excited to continue doing this. And Department of Ed has reached out and said, we want to do more. And when you can go back into classrooms, we want you to do this in classrooms. So this is really kind of blossomed into a far better thing than job awareness. Not that that's not beneficial, but we're really excited about this. And then this also included some mindfulness and yoga. So we were able to incorporate some of our other staff's expertise on that. And this was also really positive. So, and there was a website that had activities and videos similar. So all of that's still up and available if you want to check it out or have questions for me about it. Kim, was there a question?
Yes, Paige. I'm trying to catch you in between your breaths there.
Sorry.
Several different questions that came up kind of related in this area. So there's 4 that I have for you. I'll just do one. And then, so the first one comes from Debbie from Washington. This says, I'm guessing South Carolina is using IL Part B for youth outside of the WIOA age range.
Yes, and then United Way funding served some of that. Now Department of Ed is doing some of that, and then we partner with our PTI, which is perfect because I have that on the next slide. Thank you for that transition. So partnering with our Family Connection of South Carolina allows us to serve some of these students as well. And there's multiple other funding streams, and I'm happy to kind of dive through that. And I know I'm missing some. I'm positive that I am because I'm not the numbers person. And then EQUIP is a part of that too. So Grace was originally going to present with us, and she's had some medical things that have kept her at bay. And so she's got a really wonderful success story that I wanted to share of her working with an elementary age student. So she's a 9-year-old.
Sorry, can I interrupt you because there is a question specific to EQUIP that's really important. I'm to my silk. Is EQUIP an acronym? If so, what does it stand for as far as this topic goes?
No, it is not. It is just the name of the grant and the programming that we do. So it is just a name. I hope that helps. So our EQUIP leaders, so those young adult leaders on staff, provide peer mentoring, and Grace had a really wonderful opportunity as a youth was really struggling with the switch to virtual and being at home and not really understanding the virus, and some behaviors were coming out, and mom was also getting frustrated. And so they ended up on our doorstep, and Grace took on this peer mentoring relationship and actually really mentored not only this young adult through this process, but also mom, and kind of was an in-between for them and sharing Grace's personal experiences, that young adult's experiences, and then mom, and kind of being almost like a translator is how I picture it. But that ended up being a really positive relationship that we continued to grow. And that I think is really important. And it just shows, you know, connecting with youth at a younger age is just so beneficial, not only for that youth, but for their family, kind of that whole picture. And then, so we do a lot of that through our EQUIP funding, that peer mentoring, really kind of informal or as formal as that youth and the family want to pursue. And then some independent living skill work as consumers. And we do that a lot more with our PTI funding. Aja, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Hi everyone, this is Aja, and I'm going to continue. Sorry, having some echoing going on. And I'm going to continue talking about the peer mentoring and independent living skills. I also want to make a point about EQUIP. We used to have this t-shirt talking about being equipped. It's kind of like equipping youth with disabilities with the skills that they need to lead, self-advocate, and achieve their goals. Could someone go to the previous slide for me? All right, thank you. So I'm going to share some experiences I've had with middle school peer mentoring. So again, I work on less specific goals. So for example, I've worked with youth on things like conversation skills by just having conversation and bringing people into conversations, and are helping youth find ways to pursue their interests. This can also happen in group settings like summer series and EQUIP hangouts, and again, as one-on-one peer mentoring. All right, next slide, please.
Aja, this is Kim. Again, we had a question, and since you just ran over it, what does the acronym PTI stand for?
I think I'm going to let Paige handle that one.
Parent Training and Information.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So now the who and the why. So who are we talking about when we say youngest youth, and why do we need to serve them? All right, next slide. So we're talking about elementary school students. This is grades kindergarten through 5th grade, and generally ages 5 through 11, as well as middle schoolers grades 6 through 8, generally, and ages 12 through ages 12 through 14. So some of us see middle schoolers more often than others. And then some of us, and a lot of times we don't get to work with the younger middle schoolers. Paige, did you have something to add to this slide?
No, you're good to keep going, Aja.
Awesome. Next slide, please. All right. So why? There are 3 main topics we discussed when creating this presentation that we really feel point to the importance of serving young people with disabilities from a peer-based approach and from the approach of independent living philosophy. They are disability awareness, self-directed services, and habits and learned behaviors. Next slide, please. All right. So disability awareness. Acknowledging and understanding, what I mean by this is acknowledging and understanding that you are an individual with a disability. For our younger youth, this means understanding what a disability is, may include awareness and education around their specific disability and what their disability means to them. And also includes, may include awareness about other people with disabilities around you. A lot of times youth are in classrooms with other youth with disabilities, and kind of they're gaining awareness that, you know, they share something in common with these youth, or that might be why they're in a specific classroom. Building this awareness early makes it easier for a youth to be able to label, verbalize, and express their needs, or when they feel like their needs aren't being met. So this is helping them develop that self-advocacy. Another thing that's important when it comes to disability awareness is building personal disability pride. So the earlier that it's better for you to understand early that disability is a part of life and not a negative thing to be hidden. And it's not shameful to be a person with a disability. It builds resiliency. So youth get an opportunity to educate their peers earlier about what it means to be a person with a disability. And they can't teach their peers if they're not aware themselves. And also support self-awareness and self-advocacy skills. So we know that self-awareness and self-determination are key factors in post-school outcomes. So we really shouldn't be waiting till middle school and high school to start teaching this self-awareness and to start teaching this self-determination skills. And so an example I have of this is I attended a event at a middle school, and I had been in a presentation earlier that day in the auditorium, and I shared a bit about myself and what I did at ABLE and what I was currently doing. And I mentioned in the presentation that what my disabilities were. And later, while I was helping with an outdoor activity, this youth ran up to me and was very excited to share that they had one of the same disabilities I had, and was just kind of really exhibiting some disability pride. And I think that once you hear about disability in a positive way, they're excited to share that they are people with disabilities, especially when they get to hear that positive information from other people with disabilities. Next slide. Okay. So the next point I want to cover are self-directed services. At the age that we're speaking of right now, these are generally individualized education plans. So IEPs are often the first formalized services that youth get to navigate themselves or have input in. But a lot of the times it's not until high school that we think to include youth or give them that permission to start giving their input in these meetings. So it's really important that with individualized education plans, youth start participating in these early, and that they have meaningful engagement. So understanding why they're in that meeting and what the meeting's about. And it's important that, so youngest you can start engaging in IEPs early and often, and it leads to a better understanding of disabilities, a better understanding of services, and a better understanding of accommodations. And any and all participation at a young age will translate into more meaningful engagement as youth get older, including buy-in to their educational and vocational goals. So that brings me to the third point of understanding long-term goals and impacts. Right now in South Carolina, there is no alternate pathway to a high school diploma. There's essentially one way to get a high school diploma, and that means being put in a non-diploma track, means not earning your diploma. You have to take a certain certain classes to get a high school diploma. And youth have a right to choose and know for themselves. I have been in many situations with youth where they're in high school, they're just starting to engage in their IEPs, and they find out that they're not in a diploma track. And that makes the road ahead of them, if they decide that they definitely want to get a diploma, very difficult, rather than if they had been able to make that choice themselves earlier on. IEPs also connect to understanding service navigation. So this is great practice for navigating other services that people with disabilities may utilize, and they get to also learn what accommodations work for them. It's also a safe environment to catch and redirect self-advocacy skills to be the most effective. So it's so youth get to try out different advocacy tools and approaches to find how they best advocate for themselves, and they get to practice expressing what they need. And this is a skill that they're going to need throughout their entire lives while navigating services, applying for jobs, etc. This is a really important skill for all youth, but especially youth with disabilities. I remember personally when I was younger, attending a meeting about accommodations with my teachers, and I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know what accommodation was. I didn't know I had a disability, and quite frankly, I thought it was some sort of punishment that I was in the meeting in the first place. So it's really important to start, having an understanding of what these meetings are, so that youth are able to better advocate for themselves later on, rather than trying to play catch up later. All right, next slide, please. The third point that we made, sorry, I said third point before, but this is like the third major point that we wanted to make with this was habits and learned behavior. So it's easier to teach good habits rather than to break bad ones. When we connect to youth at younger ages as peers and introducing that independent living philosophy, we can create good habits both with the youth and with their families, rather than breaking bad habits that have formed when we finally engage with them at 15 years of age and beyond. This kind of eases that burden of having to unlearn any detrimental habits that were developed earlier, and just learning how to do things in a more positive way the first time. And it also helps address disparities and gaps and opportunities that that youth with disabilities face in comparison to youth without disabilities, and helps them better develop their decision-making skills. So I'm going to give an example of what I mean by that. So for me, something that I had struggled with as a youth was picking out the right clothes to wear. I had a hard time understanding that the weather correlated to the clothes that I should wear. And for a very long time, my mother would simply pick out my clothes for me. Therefore, I was not learning the skill of how to dress myself. Eventually, as I got older and I hadn't learned the skill, my mother realized that we would have to find just a different way to teach this to me. And so we developed something where I would call in to like this automatic phone messenger. I'm not sure what to call it, but it would give me the time, the temperature for the day, and the date. And based off of that temperature, we developed a method of, okay, this number means that I should wear long sleeves. This number means that it's okay for me to wear short sleeves. This number means that I should probably wear a sweater. And that way, I was able to learn how to pick out my own clothes. And so I was able to do something that my peers without disabilities were doing. And I was able to better my decision-making skills by being able to choose what it is that I would like to wear and what was appropriate for me to wear based on the weather. And I want to revisit the gaps and opportunities. Youth with disabilities are often presented with less opportunities for learning and growth. And if we start showing those possibilities and offering opportunities early, they will continue to seek out new opportunities despite the barriers that they have to face. All right, next slide. Does anyone have any questions for us?
I'm gonna, if it's okay with you, Aja, I'm gonna jump back real quick and then we'll take questions just to chat through. As I was listening, Aja and I have been talking through these 3 points a lot in the past couple of weeks, and I think a lot of us can agree, and I know we're preaching to the choir with why these things are so important, but I think these ones kept coming up because we see them as almost these learned barriers that our older youth with disabilities that we're serving, and I say older, they're all still young, but we're seeing that if they aren't aware of their disability and they're not identifying, then it's a lot harder to get them to know their accommodations. If they haven't ever been involved in their IEP process, it's harder for them to know their accommodations and what they need. And then that habits and learned behavior. How many youth have we seen that have just never been given an opportunity for some type of decision making, or they've learned that mom will always tie their shoes, and so they didn't feel like they needed to learn that skill. So that's just, I wanted to like paint the picture of where Aja and I were kind of plucking these out and why we were turning them over so much, is that we just feel like these are the things that when we're talking about serving youth that are older, we're like, man, if we had gotten to them a little bit younger and shared these things a little bit younger, like we might not be having these conversations so late in life where we're having a change of stigma that's so much harder than if we had open and honest conversations a lot younger. So just wanted to share that. All right, bring on the questions.
Okay, this is Kim again. So we have several. So coming from Stevie, how do you accomplish an inclusive group in the classroom?
The job and career awareness was fairly easy with our young adults because we weren't talking about disability specifically, but we were talking a little bit more about what a job is, what a career is, and it was a person with a disability leading that session, and they threw that out there, they talked about it, but it wasn't that main focus point. And as we got to know the youth a little bit, because we did it over 6, 30 to 45 minute sessions, so we got to know them. So it made things a little bit easier. We tried to do fun activities that were interactive with multiple modes of processing, pictures, things that you could manipulate, drawing. This is when we didn't have to worry about sharing materials as much as we do now. But I think it happened naturally. And I think that elementary school setting really opens up to making that process a little bit easier because they're using so many of those tools already. The classroom is so visual and so easy to navigate and move around. And I feel like teachers are utilizing that a lot. As we head into these social emotional concepts, so that community, diversity, inclusion, peer relationships and problem solving, I feel like an inclusive classroom is the perfect audience for that. Because then we're really able to talk about what inclusion looks like and diversity in our community of our classroom and our community as a whole, what that looks like. So I hope that answered that question.
Okay, this is Kim again from Jamie Lou Karen. I think this is great. How do you get elementary school students to understand the topics of disability history awareness? Do the youth do this? How often do they meet?
So like I said, we have really done a lot more of that disability awareness and the history with our middle school and really our high school students. I have multiple versions of a disability rights timeline there's so many events and figures and moments in history that are so important. So I have a harder and harder time of trying to narrow down some of those key things. Something that I think works really great is looking at some of the textbooks and the history lessons that students are already learning and putting some events side by side. So Brown versus Board of Education is one that they know and understand and are learning, and putting, you know, the IDEA next to that, and then looking at the timeline gap between, you know, that's a 20-year difference. Why was that? And so relating it to some of the concepts so that they're already learning. And I think that lends itself more to some of those upper elementary. And then I also find that our equipped leaders, so our young adult leaders, like Aja and her other fellow staff are the best ones to lead this, because they are a little bit more relatable to the young students there, and they're a little bit more excited to chat with someone young and exciting that's not quite a teacher.
I have a point to add to that. Yeah, so something that came to mind when I heard that question is like something I've done with elementary school age youth is we pretend that we're going to a disability pride parade. And so they make their signs, and we explain like, what's something you're proud of? And then here's what people with this is what the disability community has to be proud of. And then you can teach like, before this, people with disabilities didn't have, before the ADA, people with disabilities didn't have these rights. How would you feel if you know, and you just kind of make it very, sometimes take it to an individual level, so they understand how certain things that happen in history affect them, and also have like an activity to go along with it.
Thank you, Aja. This is Kim again. And so the next question comes from Sydney, and I'm going to follow it with Stephen's question because they both kind of go into each other. So Sydney, were you in inclusive classes, or did all the students in the classroom have disabilities? And Stephen asked, what's the youngest age of participants that you work with in your program?
Sure. So it was a mix of both, depending on which school we were going to. So some schools we saw self-contained students that were in that same classroom all day long, and they have IEPs. We saw some students that were in their resource class, so it was the time that they were being pulled out for some of those IEP services with other peers with disabilities. And then we went into 1 or 2 general education classrooms during some type of period where they could have guests come in and we weren't disrupting all of their learning, and we were checking off some of their boxes. And those teachers were super awesome, and we enjoyed them. And then we really, our youngest ones were 3rd grade. And we've done some smaller presentations. I have a coworker that went to a preschool class one time to chat, and that was really great. But we're not doing it consistently and with consistent programming. So I'm hoping with this social emotional and kind of diving in that with this newer funding that we've got, that we can really kind of target all all elementary age, so that kindergarten through 5th grade. But for the most part right now, it's been 3rd through 5th.
Okay, great. So the next question, this is Kim again, comes from David. A non-diploma track, how does that not violate the ADA?
So we have, and I know every state does different things, but so we've got our typical high school diploma, and there are very few ways to get that diploma. There's, a strict number of Carnegie credits and all of that. And there are, a few classes that you can sub out, or but it's very limited in its scope. And I know that there are some other states, West Virginia comes to mind, where there's quite a few alternatives, and things that count or have the same weight. So the course load looks a lot different. We do have it's a newer statewide credential, and only students with disabilities can earn this credential. And it has some Carnegie credits. It has a required number of work-based learning hours that students are having to take. There's employability classes that cover certain content, and so there's work being done to around educating employers, since it's a newer track to take as to what if a student puts that on a resume, what does that mean? Obviously, there are flaws in that process that we are working to change with our partners at Department of Ed. And then there's the third option, which is purely a certificate of attendance. So I encourage you, if you're not familiar with it within your state, to really check and see what state diplomas look like and what alternative diplomas look like. It's very, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but yeah, there's a lot out there. If you're not entrenched in the world, you don't really realize it's happening.
Okay, the next question. We have about 5 more minutes to be able to answer a few more. So Janet George asks, I have a student who completely refuses to admit he has a disability, even though it is impacting his education. How do you work with these students so they gain disability awareness and disability pride?
And that's that point of it almost feels like a barrier for that student, that if they could just like comprehend it, that then we can move forward with all the things that they do want to accomplish. I'm going to let Aja speak a little bit on this one as well, because a lot of my go-tos, I share about my disability in a classroom, but I am only relatable to so many students. So I always try and bring our young adult leaders with me to share their experiences, because they are younger and they're a little bit more of a peer than myself, to really kind of share their journey and their opinions. And it's a slow process, but I honestly feel like that peer portion is just so important, and really seeing yourself for youth, seeing so many different people with different disabilities, and then obviously their own disability, and just seeing it over and over again, and knowing that that person is a part of their community and there to support, slowly opens up. And I think there are some students that I don't know if we can ever kind of turn that leaf for them, which breaks my heart. But it is certainly a challenge, and that's kind of where we came to this idea of, man, if we could be serving these youth a little bit younger. Aja, do you want to add anything?
Yes. So it's something that's very hard to necessarily convince them within one meeting. It usually progress can be made when you talk to a youth for a longer period of time. I think it's really important a lot of times that it comes from a peer. I find that, again, sharing that I am their peer, I am a person with a disability, and kind of being positive about it, and sometimes even being kind of, even if it's like neutral about it, like, yeah, I have a disability, and I also, etc. So I think a lot of times youth, sometimes at home, they're being told that they don't have a disability, they're being confronted with the message that, you know, this is a bad thing, or they're being made fun of for being in the class that they're in. So there's a lot of complicating factors, but I definitely think starting early, that's why one reason starting early is critical, and also just kind of presenting disability in a positive, and not like a false security positive, but like in a positive and sometimes even neutral can be really helpful too way.
Okay, this is Kim, and this will be kind of the last question. I believe that you answered this question, so I'm going to combine it so you can say yes or no. Sydney wanted to make sure that you were in inclusion classes, or did all the students in the classroom have disabilities? Ken asked, what connections do you make with the parents to reinforce what you're teaching? And a similar question that came out of that was, how, from an anonymous attendee, how do you manage pushback from parents that are not on board with their child to be independent?
Yes, so some of those classrooms were inclusive, being gen ed students, students without disabilities, and students with disabilities, and then some of them were specific for just students with disabilities. So a little bit of both. Remind me that second question, Kim, sorry.
Okay, the next two kind of went hand in hand. It says, how do you manage pushback from parents that are not on board with their child learning to be independent? And then that kind of goes, what connections do you make with the parents to reinforce what you're teaching?
Yes, thank you. So I mentioned before, we partner with our parent and information Parent Training and Information Center, our PTI, which is Family Connection of South Carolina. So we get a lot of referrals from them, and they are a parent-run organization. So some partnership there has been helpful when they see parents that are really struggling. And so we've done a lot of referrals and making sure that we're connecting that way. There are some parents with disabilities on our staff, and I think that is a really cool role that sometimes we try and make sure that those staff members are reaching out and connecting, and kind of showing that, like, hey, your child might be a parent one day, and like, you know, here are some growth points. And I also understand, because I am a parent, and here's what I know as a parent, which I think is, you know, just as many peer avenues as you can put in there, I think are really, really important. And then, so a lot of that connection is really those youth that we work with one-on-one. So not as much as those youth that we see in those group classroom settings. We're kind of communicating with parents through teachers. So teachers are sending home notices and permissions and all of that for us to come. So our direct communication with parents is not there when we're talking about classroom visits. We have created some webinars and resources that we share and make sure that parents know that we're a resource and that they can connect with us. But for some of these more, these youth that we are connecting with one-on-one, their parents are sometimes the ones that bring them to us. And so we're able to kind of facilitate that from the get-go. Grace's story comes to mind for me, with this parent that was kind of on their wit's end, and this youth that was also on a wit's end, and she was kind of able to balance in between. We try and separate out parents and youth too, and then also bring them together, especially if there's some friction there. Obviously, we want to serve the youth if they're ready to be independent. We will find ways to do that, whether a parent is on board or not. Hopefully, we can get the parent on board with that. But I think it's really, it's kind of nuanced on what that case looks like and what that parent looks like. But a lot of times we end up pulling in staff members that can relate or have similar experiences, so that we can kind of make sure everyone feels supported.
This is Kim, and there's one last question, and I know that some people may exit because we're running really close on time. So don't forget your evaluations. So we have a live question, if the host can let Sefacor ask the very last question, and then we'll sum it up.
Hey, this is Brittany. The person who had their hand raised actually left. So thank you, but the question's no longer there.
Okay. So that's, you guys can sum it up. And again, please do your evaluations. This is Kim.
Thank you. And so I've put on the screen Aja and I's contact information, and it's included in the PowerPoint, which I believe is available to you all, but please feel free to reach out to us. I'm happy to brainstorm through programming and ideas for funding and all of that all day long. It's one of my favorites, and I think Aja has some really valuable information on connecting with youth that I encourage you to pick her brain about. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. I do have an evaluation link to send y'all if you don't mind. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Okay, and then I believe I can throw this in the chat. Is that correct? I'm hoping so. Here we go. All right. If you don't mind filling out this for us as well, that would be extremely helpful. And thank you all for your time and your energy, and I hope you're enjoying the conference. And thank you, April, for having us, and thank you, Aja, for presenting with me. And again, we're available to chat at any time. Thank you so much.